My name is Andrew Perlott. Welcome to Socratic State of Mind. Leo Strauss and his despicable project. Why taking old thinkers seriously gets you in trouble. We're doing a read-along of Leo Strauss's What is Liberal Education this month. It's a short essay that you can read in about 30 or 40 minutes. Please join us. This is my first companion essay for that essay, which focuses on Strauss himself, his goals, and his controversies. Biting the hand that feeds you. Leo Strauss fled Nazi Germany and found refuge in the United States. He was no fan of fascists, but very aware of democracy's limitations. His willingness to criticize his adopted home with incisiveness that opponents found hard to refute angered American academics from the very beginning. But he was focused on fixing Western civilization's crises, and his solutions were even more controversial than his diagnosis. Strauss proposed return as the essential response to modernity's failures, not a Luddite crusade against technology and going back to the high Middle Ages a la Against the Machine, not a rollback of civil rights or a return to slavery. His main idea was that we need to reevaluate and reconnect with the classical foundation of our civilization via the great books. This, he thought, could counter the flailing blind giant of unchecked power and technology without wisdom. We need to dip into the free common stock for the basis of a new soup. Only by doing this might classical virtues like excellence and the common good be revived. He also thought this would be required to avoid mob rule and conformism, which served the interests of the unvirtuous, uncultured majority rather than the true common good. Strauss wasn't deluded enough to think average Americans or people anywhere would embrace great thinkers en masse, but he suspected leadership from those who would might keep our system from derailing. He was an elitist, in other words, for all the good and bad that goes with that. Such elitism is unpopular today, but similar views were held by the U.S. Founding Fathers. They were deeply skeptical of the masses' ability to rule themselves, much less lead the nation. President John Adams wrote that, quote, public virtue cannot exist in a nation without private virtue, and public virtue is the only foundation of republics, unquote. An intolerable academic critique. Strauss didn't think much of the political and philosophical thinkers of his day. His big criticisms of them in the broader Western academy generally fell into two buckets. One, modern thinkers dismiss pre-modern thinkers without proving them wrong. They see them as museum relics that can only be understood as ignorant stepping stones man utilized on their way to our modern enlightened views. And two, to dismiss ideas without disproving them, they suggest ancient ideas result from particular circumstances, biases, and traits rather than from keen minds grappling for the truth. They'd have us dismiss Plato because he was European, aristocratic, and from a mercantile, slave-owning city. Marcus Aurelius, he was white, privileged, and an emperor, so what did he know of universal truths? Seneca, he was antiquity's version of a billionaire, and a powerful male to boot. According to them, everything is subjective and there are few universal truths to find, so the ancients must be dismissed as naive. Strauss insisted their nihilism and relativism rendered everything equally valid, invalidating philosophy's attempt to tackle perennial human problems like justice, virtue, and the good life. Because Strauss held up ancient ideas as valuable in their own right instead of merely chronicling them as historical relics, many of his contemporaries felt attacked. The Stoics and hidden messages. Strauss thought highly of the Stoics and mentioned them in lectures because Marcus Aurelius found, quote, the rational morality by himself in a way his work is as good for moral instruction as the New Testament, unquote. Seneca is praised for offering a model for living under tyranny. He thought highly of Stoic work on natural law, which they justified as connected to providence through the human faculty of wisdom, in line with Plato. He also thought their ideas about emotions like anger were brilliant. Yet, Strauss wrote no large essays or books on the Stoics as he did for Machiavelli, Plato, Hobbes, and Nietzsche. Why? I suspect it's because they were too straightforward. The Stoics hated discursive writing. They wanted to get to the point with unadorned, powerful prose. Everything was directly stated. They never hid their intent or their conclusions. But Strauss famously suggested that many ancients had to hide their true messages from censors who would have oppressed them. For instance, Plato's student Xenophon is often characterized as a boring moralist. Strauss insists he's very interesting. Xenophon's Education of Cyrus seems to present the Persian emperor as a pious and moral leader conquering the depraved kingdoms around him. Yet we see him manipulating religious institutions for gain, leaving a hidden message for Strauss. Perfect rule requires morality and piety, but the appearance of it alone is often what's necessary. Sometimes we must risk impiety and immorality to do the right thing and keep subjects in line for perhaps the greater good. A noble lie. Similarly, in Xenophon's writing in praise of Sparta's constitution, he'd taken shelter in Sparta after being driven from Athens. Strauss thinks Xenophon slyly highlights the contradictions and failures of the Spartan regime. This has become known as Straussian reading, seeing what is inferred between the lines to know what an author really thinks and what their true wisdom and understanding has led them to. Strauss also does this in his own writing. He often seems to argue two sides, making great points for each. It takes a careful reading to guess his true beliefs, and you will never be certain. Strauss the neoconservative? Strauss preferred deft diplomacy to force, but his reputation took a hit in 2003, 29 years after his death, keep in mind, because several former students got involved in the George W. Bush administration and promoted war with Iraq. I haven't seen credible evidence of those students citing his work as inspiration, however, and Strauss never promoted imperialism in his writings. I don't find it convincing personally. Strauss, despite looking for universal truths, described himself as a skeptic. He thought each attempt at the truth was fundamentally contestable. In this way, he's a lot like Montaigne. Quote, "Moderation will protect us against the twin dangers of visionary expectations from politics and unmanly contempt for politics," Strauss wrote. I think that's pretty much all you gotta know about that. Strauss's liberal education. This brings us full circle. What are we to actually do to get back to those great thinkers of old if we buy Strauss's argument? That's what I'll be discussing in my next companion essay. You've still got time to read along and join the discussion later in the month. Please join us. Find the link in the description. Thanks, and see you next time.